A human saved a foxy girl. Now she's hopelessly in love with him. It's a quiet night in a small town where the streets were usually empty after 10. Streetlights flickered softly, casting long shadows on the pavement. The wind was cold, but not freezing, and it carried the faint smell of wet earth from the park nearby. Most people had already gone home, leaving the town almost silent, except for the occasional hum of a car passing by or the distant barking of a dog. On nights like these, the town felt both peaceful and lonely at the same time. A man was walking home after a long day at work. His shoulders ached from sitting at a desk for hours, and his head felt heavy with thoughts he couldn't quite push away. He had always considered himself practical and calm, someone who didn't usually notice small, unusual things. But that night something caught his attention, though at first he wasn't sure what it was. Near the edge of the road, just beyond the dim light of a street lamp, he saw a small figure. At first, he thought it was a coat or a bag someone had left behind. But as he got closer, he realized it was a persona young woman, sitting on the curb, hugging her knees tightly. Her shoulders were trembling slightly, though he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear. She was wearing a hoodie with a bright orange pattern that reminded him of a fox's fur, and something about the way she sat made her look small and fragile. The man stopped for a moment. Most people would have walked past. Some might have assumed she was drunk or in trouble with the law, but he felt a quiet pull in his chest that made him pause. There was something in the way she was sitting alone, vulnerable, clearly lost, that made him want to help. Without thinking too much, he approached her carefully. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and gentle. The girl flinched at first, her wide eyes looking up at him from under the hood. Her eyes were a mix of fear and caution. She didn't answer right away. For a moment, the man thought she might run, but she stayed still, as if she was trying to decide whether he was safe or dangerous. After a few seconds, she whispered, I don't know." It was not much of an answer, but it was enough. The man crouched a little to bring himself closer to her level, careful not to seem threatening. "It's okay. You don't have to explain anything. You just look cold and a little hurt. Can I help you?" She hesitated. He could see her trembling more now, not just from the cold, but maybe from fear or exhaustion. Her hands were scraped and dirty, and there was a small cut on her knee that had dried blood around it. That's when he knew she needed help, not just words. "Come on," he said softly, offering his hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She stared at his hand as if she had never been offered help like this before. Slowly, very slowly, she took it. Her grip was weak, but she didn't pull away. He helped her to her feet, careful not to jostle her injured knee. As they walked together toward the man's car, he tried to make small talk, but she only nodded or shook her head. He didn't mind. Sometimes words weren't needed. When they reached the car, he opened the door for her and helped her inside. The warmth of the heater hit her almost immediately, and she shivered less, curling slightly in the seat. The man started driving, but kept the pace slow, not wanting to scare her or make her feel unsafe. The roads were mostly empty, which helped the silence feel calm rather than awkward. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Her hoodie still looked a little too big for her small frame, and the hood partially covered her face. But he could see the softness in her features, the way her eyes seemed alert yet tired. Like a fox always on edge, ready to run if something went wrong. He thought to himself that the nickname Foxy Girl would fit her perfectly, not because she was mischievous, but because she seemed clever, cautious, and a little wild. As if the world had taught her to be careful about trusting anyone. At first she didn't speak much. She just let him drive. But after a few minutes, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible, almost lost in the hum of the car engine. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I just want to make sure you're safe." There was a pause, and then she spoke again, a little louder this time. I haven't been safe for a long time." That stopped him. He didn't know what had happened to her, but her words carried a weight that made his chest tighten. He didn't push her for details. He didn't need to. He just knew she needed someone who would care enough to listen when she was ready. They arrived at his small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and warm. He guided her inside, helped her sit on the couch, and offered her a glass of water. She accepted it silently, sipping slowly as she watched him move around, preparing a small blanket for her to sit on. "Do you want to call someone? Your family or a friend?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I don't. I don't really have anyone." Her voice broke slightly, and he could see the emotion in her eyes. She looked away quickly, afraid he would notice the tears forming. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe here. That's what matters right now." He didn't know how long she would stay, or what her story was. He didn't even know if she was going to trust him. But at that moment, he made a silent promise. He would protect her as best as he could. He would not judge her, not rush her, and not make her feel small. He would just be there, quietly, till she felt ready to take the next step in her life. For the first time that night, she relaxed slightly. She leaned back on the couch, letting the blanket cover her legs. The fear in her eyes didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. She felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Most people would have walked past her on the street, or worse, ignored her completely. But he didn't. He had stopped. He had cared. They didn't talk much after that. Words weren't necessary. The silence between them was comfortable, like two strangers who had crossed paths for a reason neither of them could explain yet. Outside, the wind continued to blow, rattling the window panes. But inside, the apartment felt like a small island of safety. As the night grew darker, the man checked on her one last time before heading to his own room. She was curled up on the couch, eyes closed, but not fully asleep. Her breathing had steadied, and the tension in her small frame had eased. He knew she would need time to feel safe, time to trust, time to heal, and though he didn't realize it then, this night, the night he stopped to help a frightened girl in a hoodie, would change both their lives forever. She would remember his kindness for the rest of her life, and it would slowly grow into something deeper, something she didn't even understand yet. And he would soon discover that saving someone didn't just mean helping them physically, it could mean touching their heart in ways that neither of them expected. The quiet apartment. The soft glow of the streetlights through the window. And the simple act of stopping to help a stranger, it all felt ordinary. But in reality, it was extraordinary. It was the night when two lives, both lonely in different ways, started to connect. The night when a small act of human kindness planted a seed that would one day grow into love. And as she drifted into a light sleep, still curled under the blanket, the man didn't notice the small smile that touched her lips, almost imperceptibly. A smile that carried hope she hadn't felt in years. It was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, casting a warm glow across the small apartment. The man was already awake, sipping his coffee while sitting at the kitchen table. He had not slept much the night before, but he didn't mind. His thoughts kept returning to the girl on the couch, the one he had helped yesterday. Something about her situation had stayed in his mind. He didn't know her story, but he knew she had been through a lot. The girl stirred slightly, opening her eyes slowly. She looked around, blinking against the sunlight, and then focused on the man. There was a mixture of embarrassment and caution in her gaze. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, as if it could shield her from the world outside, and perhaps even from the kindness of this stranger. "Good morning," he said gently, offering a small smile. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, still shy and quiet. "I slept a little," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "That's good," he said. "You must be hungry. I can make you something to eat if you want." For a moment, she hesitated. The idea of accepting help from someone she barely knew felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But the warmth of the apartment and the lingering kindness in his voice made her feel safe enough to say yes. "Okay," she whispered. He guided her to the kitchen and prepared a simple breakfast toast, scrambled eggs, and a glass of orange juice. While cooking, he kept the conversation light, talking about ordinary things, the weather, the quiet streets, and small events from his day yesterday. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding or smiling faintly. But she didn't say much when they sat down to eat together. He noticed the small details about Hertha, way she twirled the edge of her hoodie nervously, the cautious glance she gave him when he spoke. and the faint bruise forming on her wrist. It reminded him that she had been carrying some kind of burden long before he found her. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, looking down at her plate. "I usually go by Foxy," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People call me that because I like foxes." "Foxy," he repeated, smiling. "That's a nice name. I like it." She looked up at him for a moment, surprised that he didn't tease her or think it was strange. His reaction was simple, calm, and kind. Something in that small, unassuming approval made her feel a little lighter, as if she didn't have to hide so much. After breakfast, they spent the morning in silence, each occupied with small tasks. She tidied the living room a little, folding the blankets she had slept under while he washed the dishes. There was no pressure, no expectation, just quiet companionship. For the first time in what felt like years, she experienced a sense of normalcy, a feeling she thought she had lost forever. Over the next few days, the man helped her in practical ways. He cleaned the small cut on her knee more carefully, applied a bandage, and offered simple advice about keeping it clean. He also noticed her cautious behavior, how she flinched at sudden movements, how she jumped slightly when the phone rang, and how she avoided talking about certain things. But he never pressed her. He understood that trust had to grow slowly, and she had been hurt before. One evening, while they were watching a quiet television show, she finally spoke about herself, though in very small doses. I've been living on my own for a while," she said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't really have anyone to rely on. And I made mistakes. A lot of mistakes." He nodded, listening without interrupting. "We all make mistakes," he said softly. "It doesn't mean you're not worth helping." She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. No one had said anything like that to her in years. Most people judged her before they even knew her, but he was different. His calm acceptance made her want to open up more, though she still held back. As days passed, they started spending more time together. He would take her to the nearby park for short walks, keeping the pace slow so she wouldn't feel pressured. At first, she walked carefully, always on edge, but gradually she began to relax. She even started laughing occasionally when he made small jokes about the squirrels stealing food from the benches or the way birds seemed to follow them wherever they went. Through these small outings, he learned more about her personality. She was clever and observant, noticing details that others often missed. She had a quiet sense of humor, though it was subtle and sometimes self-deprecating. She was cautious in the way she moved, the way she spoke, and the way she allowed herself to trust. But beneath it all, sensed a spark of resilience, an inner strength that had helped her survive until now. One rainy afternoon, they were walking back from the grocery store when a sudden downpour began. Most people would have run for cover, but she froze for a moment, unsure where to go. He noticed her hesitation and quickly opened his umbrella, holding it over both of them. "Come on," he said, smiling. "Let's not get soaked." She laughed softly, a sound that felt fragile yet genuine. I always forget umbrellas," she admitted. "You're lucky I'm here then," he said, and she felt a warmth in her chest she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the heat from staying dry. It was the feeling of being cared for, truly cared for, by someone who didn't even know her very well. Back at the apartment, they spent the evening cooking dinner together. She had never cooked much, and he patiently showed her how to chop vegetables safely and stir the ingredients. She enjoyed the simplicity of it, the normalcy of an ordinary task done together without any rush or expectation. It was almost like being part of a family, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Over time, she began to share little pieces of her past, though carefully. She talked about the friends who had let her down, the moments when she felt completely alone, and the mistakes she regretted. He never judged her. Instead, he listened, offered small words of encouragement, and sometimes just stayed silent, letting her feel heard. Each time she shared a piece of her story, she felt lighter, as if a small burden had been lifted from her shoulders. He also noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She would look for him when he wasn't around, sometimes smile when he said something kind, or hesitate when she needed to leave his side. At first, he didn't think much of it. He assumed it was normal gratitude or politeness. But little by little, he realized that she was growing attached to him, not just as someone who helped her, but as someone she trusted and cared about deeply. One night, after a long day of small adventures, they sat on the balcony, sipping hot tea. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and the quiet hum of life below made everything feel calm. She leaned back, resting her head against the railing, and sighed softly. "You've been really kind to me," she said quietly, almost like she was afraid the words would disappear if she spoke them too loudly. He looked at her, surprised at the depth in her voice. "I just wanted to help," he said. "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's more than that. You make me feel safe. I haven't felt safe in a long time." Her voice trembled slightly, and he could see the vulnerability in her eyes. She looked small, fragile, but also brave for admitting it. "I'm glad you feel safe," he said softly. "That's all I want." It was a quiet moment, but it was meaningful. In that simple exchange, trust had grown. She had begun to allow herself to lean on someone else, to accept help without shame or fear, and he had started to see that his small act of kindness, stopping on the street to help her, had turned into something far more significant. In the following weeks, they continued to spend time together. She began to smile more openly, laugh more freely, and even share little jokes. She started to decorate the apartment slightly, putting small touches here and there, as if claiming a space where she could belong. She still had her cautious moments, but the fear that had once dominated her life was slowly fading. He noticed all of these changes and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride exactly, but a deep sense of fulfillment in seeing someone heal. He had not planned to change her life. He had simply stopped to help a stranger. And yet, through patience, care, and simple kindness, he was helping her rebuild trust, confidence, and hope. For the Foxy girl, these days were life-changing. She had never expected to find someone who treated her without judgment, respected her boundaries, and who simply cared. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how much she had been craving that connection. She began to feel emotions she didn't fully understand: gratitude, warmth, comfort, and a small, quiet spark that made her heart beat faster when he was near. By the end of part 2, it was clear that their relationship had moved beyond a simple act of rescue. It had become a connection built on trust, patience, and understanding. And although neither of them could predict what the future held, Foxy girl had begun to experience feelings that went far beyond gratitude. She was starting to realize that she cared for him in a way she had never cared for anyone before, and that realization scared her almost as much as it thrilled her. Days turned into weeks, and life settled into a quiet rhythm for the man and the Foxy girl. The ordinary routines of breakfast, walks, small chores, and shared evenings created a comfortable space between them. It was not dramatic or extraordinary, but it was steady, and that steadiness mattered more than either of them realized. For the man, helping her had become a part of daily life. He didn't think of it as heroic or remarkable. It was just natural. He made breakfast, reminded her to dress warmly, sometimes listened as she talked in small bursts about things that didn't seem important to anyone else. He enjoyed her company, her quiet observations, and her cautious humor, though he didn't yet recognize the emotional pull that was growing between them. For the Foxy girl, every small interaction carried enormous weight. Each smile he gave her, each gentle question about her day, each simple gesture of care became a thread in the growing fabric of her trust. She started noticing little things about him: the way he kept his promises, the way he never raised his voice, the way he genuinely listened when she spoke. She began to feel a warmth in her chest when he was near, a sensation that surprised her and frightened her in equal measure. She didn't understand it at first. She couldn't ignore it. Their walks became longer, stretching beyond the nearby park into quiet neighborhoods and tree-lined streets. He didn't push her to talk, and she didn't force herself to speak unless she wanted to. She watched the world with him, noticing how he greeted strangers politely, how he held open doors for elderly people, how he seemed to have patience for even the smallest, most mundane things. These small glimpses of his character made her heart beat faster. Though she would never have admitted it aloud, one afternoon they decided to visit a small cafe near the river. The rain from earlier had passed, leaving puddles that reflected the soft afternoon sunlight. She hesitated before entering, glancing nervously at the other customers, but he gently took her hand and guided her inside. Once seated, she slowly relaxed. The smell of coffee, the soft murmur of conversation, and the warm light made her feel safe, almost like being wrapped in a protective cocoon. Over hot chocolate and pastries, they talked quietly. He asked her about her favorite books, her childhood memories, and even silly things like her favorite flavor of ice cream. At first, she answered with short responses, but gradually she began to speak more freely. He laughed softly at her small jokes, encouraged her observations, sometimes just smiled when she said something without realizing its charm. She felt a growing connection, but she also felt a twinge of fear. What if these feelings were too strong, too dangerous? Back at the apartment, evenings became moments of shared comfort. Sometimes they cooked together, with her learning to chop vegetables and stir sauces under his patient guidance. Other times they watched films, sitting side by side on the couch, occasionally sharing a blanket. She found herself leaning slightly toward him without thinking, her shoulder brushing against his, and her heart would skip a beat every time he laughed or reached for something near her. It was during these small moments that she began to understand the depth of her feelings. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. She cared for him in a way that went beyond simple appreciation. She noticed the way he would check if she had eaten enough, the way he remembered small details she had mentioned in passing, and the way he looked at her with genuine concern. Her chest tightened with a mix of longing and fear every time she caught his gaze, and she began to realize that she was falling in love. Her emotions were confusing. She had never allowed herself to care for someone so deeply before. Trusting anyone had always felt risky, dangerous, and possibly painful. But with him, the fear softened. She could sense a quiet strength in him, a calm reliability that made her feel like it was safe to open her heart. She still had moments of hesitation, glances of doubt, and whispers of fear that told her she might be getting attached too quickly, but each act of kindness from him drew her closer. One evening, as they were taking a short walk before dinner, she noticed a small butterfly resting on a flower near the sidewalk. She bent down slightly to observe it, and he stopped to look too. They stood silently, side by side, watching the delicate creature. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yes," he said softly. "It's simple, but perfect in its own way." She looked at him, suddenly struck by how attentive he was. Not just to her, but to the world around them. She felt a rush of warmth in her chest, the realization that she wanted him to notice her the same way, that she wanted to be important to him, more than just someone he helped. Her cheeks warmed, and she quickly looked down, hoping he hadn't seen the flutter in her heart. As the days passed, she found herself observing him in ways that made her pulse quicken. The way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was thinking, the way he hummed softly while washing dishes, the way he absent-mindedly tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Each tiny gesture became a memory she clung to, a reminder of the safety, comfort, and admiration she felt for him. She tried not to think about it too much, but her feelings were growing too strong to ignore. There were also moments that made her feel shy and nervous. When he accidentally brushed his hand against hers, she would pull back slightly, her heart racing. When he complimented something about her smile, her cleverness, or even the way she described his story, she felt both elation and fear. The idea that someone could care for her so deeply that she could care for him was both thrilling and terrifying. One rainy night, they stayed in, sitting near the window while the rain pattered softly against the glass. She had brought a book to read, but found herself watching him more than the pages. He was focused on writing something for work, his brow slightly furrowed. But when he noticed her gaze, he gave her a small, reassuring smile. She felt her chest tighten, a fluttering feeling that made her look away immediately. "I like being around you," she finally whispered, almost as if testing the words before saying them out loud. He looked at her, surprised but calm. "I like being around you too," he replied softly. Those words, simple and sincere, sent a wave of warmth through her. She felt both relief and nervousness. Relief because he cared, nervousness because she realized just how much she cared in return. She didn't yet understand how to manage these feelings, but she knew that they were real. Even ordinary days became special. Cooking together, walking through quiet streets, sharing small jokes, or simply sitting in silence became moments she treasured. Every smile, every gentle word, and every shared glance added weight to her growing feelings. She began to notice that she was no longer just the foxy girl he was helping. She was someone who wanted to be near him, someone who wanted to matter to him in a way that was more than gratitude. Despite these emotions, she remained cautious. Love was new to her, and vulnerability had always been risky. She wasn't sure if he felt the same way, or if he even could. Still, she allowed herself small acts of affection, inching closer during movies, sharing little personal stories, and sometimes laughing freely at things she normally would have kept to herself. Each time she felt a little braver, a little closer to letting him see her heart fully. By the end of this period, it was clear that their relationship had transformed. What began as a simple act of kindness had grown into companionship, trust, and the first stirrings of love. She felt a bond with him that she had never felt with anyone else, a deep connection built on understanding, care, and time. And though she tried to hide the intensity of her feelings, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with him, yet she still struggled with fear. Love was risky, and her heart had been hurt before. She wondered if her feelings were too strong, too fast. She wondered if he might not feel the same way, or if he might ever see her as anything more than someone he had helped. These doubts weighed on her, but they didn't stop her from caring. Each small act of his kindness, each patient smile, and each shared moment drew her deeper into her emotions, slowly, gently, and irresistibly. And so, their ordinary days filled with quiet routines, small joys, and subtle connections continued. For the foxy girl, it was a period of awakening, a time when she discovered that it was possible to trust, to feel safe, and to care for someone without fear of immediate loss. And for the man, although he didn't yet fully recognize it, the bond was growing stronger too, built on patience, respect, and mutual understanding. By the close of Part 3, the foxy girl had begun to understand a powerful, unsettling truth. Her feelings had grown beyond gratitude and comfort. She had fallen in love, quietly, deeply, and completely. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she could no longer ignore the way her heart responded every time he was near. Weeks passed, and the bond between the man and the foxy girl grew stronger. Their lives had settled into a quiet rhythm, each day flowing naturally into the next. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had transformed into something far deeper. They shared meals, small walks, and long evenings in the apartment. She trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. And with that trust came feelings she could no longer ignore. At first, she tried to keep her emotions hidden. Love was new to her, and it was frightening. She worried that admitting her feelings might ruin everything. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he only saw her as someone he had helped, someone fragile and in need? The thought of losing him, even just as a friend, was unbearable. Yet every time he smiled at her, spoke gently, or laughed at something she said, her heart responded in a way that left her breathless. One evening, they were sitting in the living room after dinner, sharing a quiet moment. He was reading a book, and she was curled up nearby with her notebook, writing down small thoughts and sketches. She glanced at him from time to time, noticing the way his eyes focused, the soft movements of his hands, and the quiet calm that seemed to surround him. Every detail made her heart race. And she found herself wishing he would notice her in a different way, not just as someone he had helped, but as someone he could care for deeply. "I really like spending time with you," she said softly, almost as if the words were dangerous to speak aloud. She quickly looked down, afraid he would hear too much in her voice. He looked up from his book, smiling gently. "I like spending time with you too," he said, unaware of the deeper meaning her words carried. Her chest tightened. That simple acknowledgement felt like both a relief and a torment. Relief because he had spoken kindly. Torment because it reminded her that she wanted more, much more, but she wasn't sure if he felt it too. Over the next few days, her feelings became harder to contain. Every small gesture of his hand offered to steady her as she tripped. A kind word when she was unsure, or even just his presence nearby, her heart raced. She found herself thinking about him constantly, replaying conversations in her mind, remembering every smile, every laugh, and every quiet moment they had shared. She realized that what she felt was no longer simple affection or gratitude. She was in love, deeply, entirely, and without reservation. But fear remained. Love had always been risky for her. She had been hurt before, and the thought of exposing her heart left her trembling. She didn't know if he could return her feelings, and the possibility of rejection was terrifying. So she tried to keep her emotions hidden, smiling and laughing as usual, but never letting herself linger too long in the moments that made her feel weak with longing. One rainy afternoon, he suggested they go for a walk to the nearby park. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles on the sidewalks and a soft, fresh scent in the air. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she wanted to face the world outside. But he gently took her hand, giving her the courage to step forward. As they walked, she noticed how naturally he guided her, always attentive to her comfort and safety. She felt a wave of affection and longing, wishing he could feel even a fraction of what she felt. They sat on a bench near the pond, watching ducks glide across the water. She couldn't help but stare at him, noticing the subtle way his expression softened as he watched the ducks, the quiet confidence in his movements, and the gentle way he seemed to move through the world. Her chest tightened, and she realized she could no longer ignore the intensity of her feelings. "Do you ever feel like someone really understands you?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he said, "when I'm with people who are honest, kind, and open, I do." She swallowed hard, feeling her heart thump. I think I've never really felt that before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not until now." He gave her a small, gentle smile, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. The smile didn't confirm her feelings, but it made her feel seen. For the first time, she realized she might be ready to take a risk, to say what she felt, even if it scared her. That evening, back at the apartment, she found herself restless. She couldn't focus on her sketches or her notebook. Her thoughts kept returning to him. How kind he had been, how patient he always was, and how much she wanted to be near him, to matter to him in a way she hadn't thought possible. She paced the room, debating whether to speak, to confess the truth that had been building inside her for weeks. Finally, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, and approached him as he sat reading on the couch. I need to tell you something," she said softly. He looked up, surprised, but nodded encouragingly. "You can tell me anything," he said. She paused, searching for the right words. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "You didn't just save me when you found me," she whispered, her voice trembling. You saved me in ways I didn't even know I needed. And I think I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Silence filled the room. He blinked, processing what she had just said. She held her breath, afraid he would reject her, afraid he would say that she was mistaken, afraid that this moment would destroy everything they had built. But instead of pulling away or looking uncomfortable, he remained calm. He studied her for a moment, taking in the vulnerability in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice, and the courage it had taken to speak. He reached out slowly, placing a hand gently on hers. I didn't realize," he said softly. "I care about you too. More than I thought I could." Her heart leaped, a mixture of relief and joy flooding through her. Tears welled up in her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of happiness. Of love finally acknowledged. She leaned slightly toward him, feeling the warmth of his hand and the quiet strength in his presence. Over the next few hours, they talked, slowly, carefully, exploring the emotions that had been building for both of them. She confessed her fears, her hesitations, and the pain of past experiences. He shared his own feelings, explaining that he had never imagined that his simple act of helping her could lead to this deep connection. They laughed softly, cried quietly, and held each other through moments of vulnerability. It was not a perfect fairy tale moment. There were still fears, doubts, and uncertainties, but it was real, and it was theirs. For the Foxy girl, finally speaking her truth was liberating. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a new feeling of hope and warmth. For the man, acknowledging his feelings brought clarity and a new depth of care. What had begun as compassion had blossomed into love, patient, careful, and genuine in the days that followed. Their relationship settled into a new, deeper rhythm. They were no longer just caretaker and rescued. They were partners in a shared life, learning from each other, supporting each other, and growing together. The Foxy girl began to feel confident, strong, and loved in ways she had never imagined. Her laughter became freer, her smiles brighter, and her trust in him unshakable. And though they knew the road ahead would have challenges and uncertainties, fears, and the ordinary struggles of life, they had taken the first, most important step. They had opened their hearts to one another. They had admitted the truth of their feelings, and in doing so, they had discovered that love could grow quietly, patiently, and beautifully from the simplest act of kindness. By the end of Part 4, the Foxy girl's love was no longer hidden. It had been confessed, acknowledged, and reciprocated. And as they sat together that evening, hands intertwined and hearts connected, they both understood that their journey together was only just beginning, a journey built on trust, care, and the deep, unspoken understanding that sometimes love grows in the quietest, most unexpected ways. After the Foxy girl's confession, life between them felt different, yet perfectly natural. The tension and uncertainty that had lingered for weeks were replaced by something warm and steady, a quiet understanding that they cared for each other deeply. Even simple activities like cooking together or sitting on the couch reading now carried an extra layer of meaning. Every glance, every small smile, every shared laugh became a way of expressing what words could not fully capture. The Foxy girl felt lighter, freer, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. She could laugh openly without worrying about being judged. She could speak her mind, share her thoughts, and simply be herself. And she noticed that he seemed happier too, calmer and more attentive, as if his care for her had transformed into a deep affection he could no longer ignore, despite their mutual feelings. They were both careful. They knew that love was not just about emotions, it was about trust, patience, and understanding. They continued to support each other in small, everyday ways, showing kindness without expectation and respect without pressure. It was this balance that made their relationship strong, even though they were still learning about each other and themselves. One Saturday morning, they decided to spend the day outdoors. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over the town. Birds sang in the trees, and the fresh breeze carried the scent of flowers from nearby gardens. They walked together down quiet streets, holding hands loosely, neither speaking much, but both enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's presence. At a small park near the edge of town, they stopped to sit on a bench. The Foxy girl leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his arm around her shoulders. She realized that she no longer felt the fear that had once defined her life. She felt safe, valued, and loved in a way that she had never imagined possible. "You know," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the rustle of leaves, "I never thought I would feel this. Happy, not really. I mean, I've had moments, but nothing like this." He looked at her and smiled, a quiet, understanding smile. "I know," he said. "You've been through a lot, and you deserved someone who would care. I'm just glad I can be that person for you." Her chest tightened at his words. She had expected to feel nervous or uncertain when he spoke so openly about his feelings. But instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love. She rested her head against his shoulder, letting the moment sink in, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened even further. They spent weekends exploring nearby towns, trying new foods at small cafes, and walking along quiet trails where the only sounds were birds and their own footsteps. Each adventure strengthened their connection, revealing layers of their personalities and shared values. He admired her cleverness and thoughtfulness, and she admired his patience and consistency. Each discovered something new in the other. Small details that made their love feel real and enduring. Even mundane tasks became moments of intimacy. Grocery shopping turned into playful debates over which fruits to buy. Doing laundry involved gentle teasing over whose clothes were wrinkled or mismatched. Cooking dinner together became a dance of cooperation and laughter. These ordinary moments, repeated daily, were the foundation of a love built on shared life rather than grand gestures. At night, they often sat by the window, sipping tea and watching the city lights twinkle below. Sometimes they spoke about their dreams, places they wanted to visit, things they wanted to learn, and hopes for the future. Other times, they simply sat in silence, letting the quiet speak for them. The Foxy girl would occasionally glance at him, marveling at how his presence alone could make her feel safe and cherished. One evening, while the rain pattered gently against the window, she turned to him, her eyes soft. "Do you ever think about the day we first met?" she asked. He nodded slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "All the time," he admitted. "I didn't realize then how much stopping that night would change both our lives." She smiled, feeling a wave of nostalgia and emotion. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I didn't trust anyone, but you. You made me believe that someone could care, and I think that's when I started falling in love with you." His hand found hers, squeezing it gently. "And I think I started noticing you differently too, little by little. I didn't realize how much I cared until I saw how much you mattered to me." Her heart fluttered at his words. It was a confirmation she had longed for. Yet it felt even more meaningful because it came naturally, honestly, and without pressure. In that moment, they both understood that love had grown quietly, patiently. And surely between them, the Foxy girl also discovered new confidence within herself. She realized that she no longer needed to hide, to guard her heart, or to fear the world. She had found someone who would stand by her, respect her boundaries, and cherish her for who she truly was. Her past, full of fear and solitude, had shaped her, but it no longer defined her future. With him, she felt capable of embracing life fully, with hope and joy. One weekend, they decided to take a short trip to a small town near the mountains. The journey was filled with laughter, conversation, and quiet reflection. They walked along trails lined with wildflowers, stopping occasionally to admire the view. At the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley, they paused. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She looked at him, feeling the enormity of her emotions. "I never thought I would feel like this," she said softly. "Like I belong somewhere with someone." "With you." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You do belong," he said. "With me, with us. And I hope you'll let me be there for you. Always." Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of love, safety, and hope. She realized that the love she had feared might be too fragile was actually strong and resilient. It had grown from trust, patience, and small acts of care, and now it felt unshakable. As they returned home, they carried this new depth of understanding with them. Their relationship was no longer just companionship. It was love expressed in every choice, every word, and every action. They knew that life would not always be easy. There would be challenges, uncertainties, and moments of fear, but they also knew that they could face them together. Their bond was built on trust, patience, and the certainty that they mattered to each other in ways that went far beyond simple gratitude or fleeting attraction. Over time, the Foxy girl's laughter became more frequent and carefree. She shared her thoughts openly, made small plans for the future, and even started exploring hobbies she had once abandoned. She had found not only love, but also a sense of purpose and belonging. And he in turn found joy in seeing her grow, in knowing that his small act of kindness had transformed into something extraordinary. They continued to celebrate. Ordinary moments together, morning coffee, evening walks, shared meals, quiet talks, and playful teasing, all became expressions of love. Every glance, every touch, every word mattered. And though they knew life could be unpredictable, they were confident that their bond would endure because it had been built slowly, honestly, and with care. The story of their meeting, their gradual closeness, and the eventual confession became a memory they cherished. She often thought back to the night he had stopped to help her, realizing that what seemed like a small decision had changed everything. He had offered safety, patience, and kindness, and in return, she had found love, trust, and hope. By the end, their journey was not about grand gestures or dramatic events. It was about the quiet, steady growth of affection, trust, and understanding. It was about learning to care for someone deeply, to respect their boundaries, and to cherish their presence. It was about the extraordinary power of simple kindness, transformed over time into lasting love. And so, life continued. They faced small challenges, celebrated small victories, and shared countless ordinary moments that now held extraordinary meaning. The Foxy girl was no longer scared, lonely, or unsure. She was loved, safe, and confident, and she loved in return, fully and without reservation. In the quiet evenings, sitting together and holding hands, they both knew that their love had been born from something simple yet profound, a single act of kindness on a quiet night. It was proof that small gestures could change lives, that trust could grow slowly, and that love could blossom quietly, naturally, and beautifully. And in that ordinary, gentle, and enduring love, they found everything they had ever hoped for: safety, trust, companionship, and the unshakable certainty that they would face the future together.